Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to the Precipice Fiction podcast, Pros and Cons. I believe this is episode 8. I would like to acknowledge that I am zooming in this morning from the land of the Darug people and would like to pay my respects. I am Burnham, and joining us today is Eldridge.
Hi.
We'll get it eventually.
Matan Elul.
Hey there.
Paddy Boylan.
Howdy.
And James Healy. Today's topic, I was going to trot out one of my party tricks, where I love to talk about the neuroscience behind creativity. So far to date on our podcast, we've talked a lot about craft, ideas, and basically, the nuts and bolts of writing. But today was our chance to talk a little bit more about the intangible side of writing, when the magic happens, how tips and tricks to get motivated, how people get into the zone, that kind of thing. Before we dive into it, I wanted to do the round the table thing of what everyone's been reading or writing at the moment. And I will jump in first because last night I finally watched the newest Evangelion movie. It's formally called like 3.0 plus 1.0 thrice upon a time.
What? They made another one? When did this come out?
Maybe like a year and a half, like October last year.
They just can't stop remaking that ending, can they?
Yep.
No, that's the point of the franchise at this point. And it's the highest grossing movie in Japan ever, because Japan can't get enough of this like self-flagellation that is Evangelion. But watching those movies is like, I can't even describe that experience. Like, you just walk away like you've been hit on the head.
Yeah.
Like I can't, like, I do words for a living and I can't even describe what happened to me last night watching that movie. It was just bananas, just bonkers. And it's even funnier when you know, like, the meta narrative of what Hideki Anno is doing behind it. Like, he just wants to punish his audience. Every time they have an expectation and want him to do something, he's like, I will go out of my way to do the opposite. And all the fandom's like, yes, please. It's a bizarre franchise, but I love it so much.
Punish his audience in Shinji.
Can I ask, what is this? And for anyone listening who doesn't know what this is.
So even Neon Genesis Evangelion has been around for a couple of decades. It's a powerhouse anime franchise, famous for big fighting robots, but it's not really. It's also kind of about puberty and like Jewish history.
Okay.
Like there's a lot going on that's really bizarre.
And biblically accurate angels fighting against mechs.
Yeah.
Which is the worst
real
kind
weird,
of angels.
Yeah, the worst kind of angel.
Yeah,
The worst kind of angels are the biblical.
I love them, man.
It wants to punish people who think they're going in for giant robot fighting. Like, that's the whole premise. So again, it's expectations and punishing you for having those expectations.
Yes.
Well, don't put a giant robot on the poster then.
Oh, he's going to. There's probably still that. If anyone's seen any of his other movies, like, there's a point where he it stops being anime and it's just live film footage of like a theater audience, like a movie theater audience. So it's meant to be the audience. You're sitting there in the theater and you're meant to have this meta moment of examining yourself and why you're watching this. And he does it again in this film a little bit, where the animation starts breaking down and it's like a bad Transformers set. And I'm like, this is wow. There's a lot. Anyway, I wanted to get that off my chest quickly. What else? What has everyone else been watching or reading?
I just wanted to say that a podcast with the topic of how do we get ourselves in the zone of writing could end up just being a therapy meeting for me at the moment. But why not? That's good too, therapeutic. What am I reading? I am reading the fantastically readable Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel.
Yeah, I started reading that a little while ago.
Okay.
And
Pretty sure I've
it
got
was
that on
waiting
the
for
shelf.
Yeah, it was waiting for me for like 2 months because I was plowing through Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, which I enjoyed, but did take me a while to get through. It's beautiful but very dense, A Tale of Two Cities. Anyway, I just chewed like I think 70 pages last night of Wolf Hall, and considering I was very tired, that's quite the achievement. Without any spoilers, highly recommended historical fiction.
I love how you talk about spoilers because like it is quite accurate historical fiction, but I was the same, like reading it, I'm just like, I want to look up and know more about this. And I would stop myself from Googling because I'm like, no, it'll ruin the plot.
Spoilers are out there.
Have any of you guys seen the BBC production of it?
I have.
Yeah, Matan, I really recommend it. It's so good. It's really good. Yeah.
It makes one bizarre character choice from the books.
Who's the bizarre
that I don't approve of? An implied relationship between from Cromwell's perspective and Anne. And I thought that's not in the books. And they're just, I don't know, they wanted to compete with all the other like racy BBC.
They don't need to. They're BBC. They don't need to compete with anyone. They're on a different level.
Exactly. But that's like my only criticism. Otherwise, I adore the 2 seasons, and for all the reasons to be mad at COVID for delaying a 3rd season. How about you, Paddy?
Still reading Moby Dick, which is my white whale. Playing Elden Ring, which is partly written by George R. R. Martin, so I could say it's literature.
Yeah,
I can say it's literature. And finally, starting on my 3rd draft. So once again, for anyone listening / watching at home, we're actually part of a writing collective. We're releasing an anthology soon, and we're up to the 3rd draft of our short stories. And I've started my 3rd, and yeah, it's definitely tighter than it was. I'm absolutely sick of this story. I never want to read it again. But it's good that it's been through this crucible because, yeah, it's in a better place. I haven't been writing for a long time, and it's actually been great to get back into it. I've really, really missed it. So then I'm going to gear up for continuing on my book.
Yeah, no, I want to respond to that because I am also still listening Moby Dick, and I got up to the bit where Queequeg saves the guy who fell into the whale's head that falls into the ocean, and I just loved that. Well, spoilers. But it was like, it was such, there's whales involved and the ocean's involved. I just love that passage. I keep oscillating between being like, that is the best sentence I have ever heard. This is amazing. This is genius. And then pages and pages if I have no idea what's going on. I'm struggling.
But for the parts when it's good, you understand why it's considered a classic. Like, when it's good, it's magnificent. Yeah. Yeah.
How about you, James?
Not as much reading this week. I went and got myself employed, which is terrible. So I'm very busy. I'm still slowly working my way through Silk Roads, which I might have mentioned on the podcast before. It's the history of the world from the perspective of the Middle East. So it's like a non-Western perspective of a lot of different things. And it views the Middle East as like the center of everything, since it was one of the oldest kind of central hubs for communication and trades and stuff. So it's quite good to get different perspectives on all the kind of like Western history and then other aspects of what was going on in other countries at the time, kind of for like perspective. So that's quite good. And I'm also working on my 3rd draft of Cooling Engines, which is the story that I'm putting forward for the anthology. And that is going well when I have time to work on it. I've been not in the habit of editing for the longest time. So it's been good to kind of get those gears turning again.
Excellent. No, I feel the same. I'm now full-time employed, and I've been forcing a new routine of waking up early every morning to write. And I'm first drafting for the first time in a long time. I'm not actually editing. I've taken all the pressure off myself to not do any editing at the moment, and like just writing feels like really good for the first time in a long time. But it's probably terrible. But I'm not even letting myself care about that at the moment. How about you, Alex?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of stuff on, I've been reading a lot and also writing a lot on Reddit's No Sleep sort of forum there. So that's been really encouraging because it's given me an excuse to write a lot of very short things, which is kind of my natural pathway, I guess, channel that I tend to go towards. And also I've been reading a lot of horror, some of it really good, some of it really bad. But both of those things are valuable in their own right. One short story I recommend, which is the only thing I think I've read for a long time that actually made me frightened, is I think it's called "My Sugar Daddy Asked Me for Weird Favors." It sounds bizarre. It's terrifying. Yeah, my sugar daddy asked me for real. It's the top thing on No Sleep. That's ever. It got like 50,000 upvotes, so it's very, very popular. But just there's two parts. So the second part's good, but not as good. But the first part is just like, wow. I can't even describe it.
Really
talk about clickbait.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. That's probably why it's so popular. But it is
Good
very.
book.
And then the other thing I just watched really recently was H Bomber Guy, who's a YouTuber. He did
he's so good.
He's so good. He did a breakdown of a game called Pathology, which is like the most meta thing you could ever possibly conceive of. He's like, this game is amazing. Do not play it. Like, not even play it. Like anyway. So I think I'm going to play the second one on that because he's recommended that. But yeah, the whole video games as a high literature thing is always pretty cool, and I think Elden Ring kind of runs into that as well. Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
If anyone's listening to this, check out I Shouldn't Have Killed That Spider, which is the name of the Reddit story Alex has written. And
that's right. Someone made a narration of it.
Yes, and it's been adapted into some
narration. It's a third person has just asked me to do it today. So
like within 12 hours, Alex.
Yeah, it was really weird. But I'm grateful. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, off that happy note, I wanted to ask everyone what it feels like when they're struggling. So just if people were able to articulate that feeling when they sit down at a blank page, and the words just aren't coming. If you have an anecdote of when you've struggled with that recently, not to be rude, but I probably could throw it to Matan.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I must say that struggling usually for me is not even getting to the blank page. To me, the real struggle is to get my laptop, not on Facebook, not to watch something, just to open the freaking Word document. I find that the blank page is less threatening to me than what comes before it. But since we're here to talk about no inspiration, I get that feeling. Sometimes for me, I'm coming back to a story I already started. And I got the blank ahead of me. And I hope I don't mess this up. And I just can't get back into the state of mind I was when I started writing the scene. I think that's why a lot of writers, I notice, write scenes that are 2,000 words-ish, because that's what they're capable of putting out in one sitting. And then they don't have to deal with this, how do I stitch together 2 different days and have them feel coherent? But yeah, just got to punch through it, I guess.
I tend to find my period of lowest ebb usually happens after, especially if I'm writing something that's long form, like a novel or something. Like I said, my natural thing is to do a short story and just punch it out. And if it's 1,200 words of something that I understand and I know how it's going to finish, I can usually just blast that out and it's not really a problem. What I tend to happen, I find that if I don't really have a clear idea of where the scene is going, if I haven't forethought of that, then I get about 600 to 800 words in and then it just sort of grinds to a halt. That's a pretty common thing for me, I find.
Yeah, just with a blank page, I often find what I try to do to start off is just come up with an interesting first line and then go from there. But there's times when I sit down and it just feels so stale. Yeah. And I just feel like I'm spinning my wheels. And I'll have maybe a Word document open and it'll just be lines and lines and lines of crap. And I'll just be like, none of these feel like a good jumping off point. I don't know where to go from here. And that just feels like you're just watching the time pass by and you're like, I only had so long to actually get this going. And I feel like I've gotten nowhere in that time.
Alex talks all the time about the metaphor of like, it's a muscle and you got to keep it active. I think that's so true.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those times when you're just writing crap, like, but even just writing the crap it's part of the process. It's part of the practice.
100%.
It's almost like you have to exorcise the bullshit from yourself in order to get like those first that bad 1,000 words out of your system until you get onto the gold.
You will end up stumbling on something. Like, hopefully, if you keep at it, you'll end up stumbling on something, and you're like, you know what, that wasn't where I was thinking of going, but that is something I can jump off from.
Yeah.
What do you guys do to get out of it besides the obvious punch through it? Like, do you guys have any
I will.
tactics?
Let me put a pin in that, Matan. I wanted. We will get to that. On the opposite side of the coin, then, what does it feel like when you're in the zone, when it's working for you, and the words are flowing, and you know you're having a good day?
Feels like channeling.
Honestly,
Yeah, it feels like magic.
It feels like a one-person seance.
Best feeling in the world. I mean, I don't know how to. Maybe I'm overreacting here, but all sitting here, it is just one of the best feelings out there. Just
the time just
having it to work.
I would say. So sorry, Paddy. After you.
There's just it feels innately good. It feels like something that you don't even need to think about. Almost, it's automatic, and you know it's good. And Matan, it feels amazing. Like I know what I'm producing is good. I know that I'm able to produce it. It feels like it's coming straight out of my muscles or straight out of a deep part of my brain. That's all.
I would say it feels like the story is writing itself.
Totally.
And you're just, for lack of a better word, the vessel for it. And your fingers are just, you're basically transcribing something. And it's funny because sometimes if you've ever tried transcribing your own story, sometimes that feeling, if you're really into it and really excited about it, is very, very similar to the one of literally dumping it out of your brain.
What's transcribing here? I don't
like literally having something in front of you that you're writing down onto the computer. Maybe if you've written it out in hand and you're just like, it's a very similar feeling if you, in a certain sense. So I don't know, maybe that says something.
That's interesting.
There's points when, like, if a story is going really well, that when I'm not writing, if I'm going out about my day, I'm just thinking about the next part of the story, and I kind of feel like I'm familiar enough with the characters and I'm familiar enough with the voice that I'm almost thinking in the voice of the story throughout my day, and I'm just waiting to get back to the page or back to the computer to just do the next part of the story. And I already understand enough of the plot, or maybe enough of the world, or even enough about the characters, that I know what their decisions are prior to writing them into the situation. It's just a matter of, well, now this has happened, and I know that they want to do this, and that's perfect because it's getting me right to where I wanted to be, without it feeling contrived, without me having to sit back and think, how do they feel about this? What decision will they make? And where does that send the story? It just all comes right out onto the page.
Yeah, I would like to ditto what everyone's saying about the idea of it's just happening, it's writing itself, you're just transcribing, but especially what you're saying, James, I get that a lot as well, where if I get into a really good routine of I'm writing during the day, I usually play out what happens next just before I'm going to sleep. It's almost like my own form of meditation, that I'll start just running what might happen next, and I'll fall asleep at some point during that running, and then I can wake up and it's there and I go. So that's when I'm in a big long form project, and I've described it to my partner before that I know I'm finally in it when the characters start nattering on their own. So there might be a week where I'm forcing it, where I'm sitting down at the computer every day writing a little bit, but the characters aren't nattering yet. They're not doing their own talking. It's so I trust enough in the process that after maybe a week, they're going to just start talking in the back of my head. And then I will just have to exist throughout my day, just writing down small bits of dialogue and small moments until the next time I'm at my computer.
No, but any of you guys, do you keep like notepads or whatever on your phone? So you just like, whatever you're doing, you immediately write down, oh, I need to put this into my book.
I
send
do have
emails to
notes
myself.
on my phone.
Nice. Rarely for things I'm working on though, oddly.
Sorry?
Rarely for things I'm actually working on though. It'll just be a random thing. I'll be like, oh, that's a cool character name.
Yeah,
I like the idea of emails. Like have a folder in your mailbox. Just
not even a folder. I just have a million emails for myself. It gets
you
it's a bad
you must
filing
have
system.
A folder, Paddy.
Honestly.
What do you mean? You just keep it in the inbox?
My inbox is. I'm not going to talk about my inbox. It's a bad state. But yeah, I need a better.
And organize your inbox.
As a really practical suggestion. So for a long time, I was just using phone notes, like the Notes app. But then I got really sick of like transferring them across to my computer. So I started using OneNote. I think this is a Microsoft solution, probably not a Mac solution. But it's an app on my phone that will automatically sync to my computer, so it's always there. So whether I'm editing on my computer or my phone, it's the same folder, and I find that really started streamlining what I was doing. I wanted to share some fun quotes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book The Neuroscience of Creativity, which is written by Nancy C. Anderson, and basically everything I'm going to quote is going to come from that book. But in that book is collected a series of quotes from famous artists throughout history when they were describing what we were describing, what it feels like when you're in the zone and it feels great. And I remember when the first time I read these, it was just really validating to be like, oh, all these other famous people are trying to articulate the same thing I feel when I'm writing. So Neil Simon says, I slip into a state that is apart from reality. I don't write consciously. It is as if the muse sits on my shoulder. Mozart says, where I am, as it were, completely in myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, say traveling in a carriage or walking after a good meal or during the night when I cannot sleep, it is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they came, I know not, nor can I force them. My subject enlarges itself, becomes methodized and defined, and in the whole, though it may be long, stands almost complete and finished in my mind, so that I can survey it, like a fine picture or a beautiful statue at a glance. Nor do I hear in my imagination the parts successively, but I hear them, as it were, all at once. What a delight this is, I cannot tell. All this inventing, this producing takes place in a pleasing, lively dream. Wygotsky says, generally speaking, the germ of a future composition comes suddenly and unexpectedly. If the soul is ready, that is to say, if the disposition of the work is there, it takes root with extraordinary force and rapidity, shoots up through the earth, puts forth branches, leaves, and finally blossoms. I cannot define the creative process in any other way than by this simile. Poincaré says, one evening, contrary to my custom, I drank black coffee and could not sleep. Ideas rose in crowds. I felt them collide until pairs interlocked, so to speak, making a stable combination. By the next morning, I had established the existence of a class of fusion functions, those which came out from the hypergeometric series. I had only to write out the results, which took but a few hours. Spender says, inspiration is the beginning of a poem, and it is also its final goal. It is the first idea which drops into the poet's mind, and it is the final idea which he at last achieves in words. So those were the 5 little excerpts, but I absolutely adore those.
What it sounds like they all have in common is that when creativity is really flowing, it is effortless. It wants to come out. You don't need to force it. It's going to come out whether you want to or not, which is, that's the experience. That's it. These ideas want to manifest.
So the little lecture part of this podcast, basically, so I do a little bit of teaching, and I love starting all my classes off with this lesson because I want to demystify the idea, at least my personal belief, that creativity is something anyone can do. I want to dispel the belief that, say, creativity is something only like a certain special few people can do. That, say, what Alex and Paddy were saying earlier, that it is a muscle anyone can train, that it isn't just, oh, that person was just born creative, so we'll leave the creativity to them. And I like linking it back to this neuroscience study, that it is a muscle we can train. So the really super bastardized version of what the book goes on to explain is, say there's 3 different forms of brain patterns. There's, say, the baseline is when we're really close to sleep, are asleep, or super relaxed, just down the bottom brain activity. In, say, near the middle band is your everyday, you're going about your job, doing your stuff. That's where the brain activates. And then there's the the top band that exists for really hyper concentration. Just you feel like you're thinking faster. I'm sure we can all relate to that. I know I sometimes get that feeling even when I'm playing video games and I feel like I'm in the zone. Like if I'm having a really good PvP match and I'm just shotgunning everyone. Like I feel like my brain activity is up there. I've also experienced it while I'm sight reading, playing music. When I used to play a lot of music back in the day, if I'm sight reading really well and kicking ass, I feel like my brain is up there. And it's the same feeling again when I'm having a really good writing day and the words are just flowing.
I think it's often called flow state. Right?
Flow,
Don't know
yeah.
flow, but I've heard the term flow state being used.
Cool. Yeah. I don't doubt it is. So what this book honed in on was this idea of, cool, if we want to train ourselves to reach this high level of thinking, how can we do it more often? So what they did is they had a whole bunch of creatives come in, they stuck the nodes on their head to just see what their brain was doing when they were being creative. And what they found was, instead of, say, going from everyday up into high creativity, their brains would do this dip down into the lower activity state before it would suddenly shoot all the way back up. And it was kind of a repeated thing they saw happening again and again and again. And that was kind of the interesting anomaly they wanted to hone in on, and like, oh, that's interesting that it seems almost easier to go from baseline to top rather than middle to top. So the idea became, well, maybe it's easier to train the muscle we can train ourselves to go down rather than training ourselves to go up, if it's easier to do this shooting up. So what it does is talk about, when do you find yourself having those ideas that come out of nowhere? And I know for me, myself, my own personal anecdotes are when I'm driving, unfortunately, is when a lot of ideas come unbidden, which is an unfortunate commentary on what my brain activity is doing while I'm driving. Apparently it's in the lower state, but it is when you're doing that really menial labor you're not concentrating on. The other time I get ideas is just before I fall asleep. And I think a lot of creatives talk about that as well. Like, damn, why do the ideas always happen at night? Again, it's because your brain has done the dip down before it shoots up. And the other one for me is in the shower as well. I get ideas suddenly in the shower, which is really annoying. And when I'm doing the dishes, another really menial labor task where, I'm just, the brain's not there, the brain's gone elsewhere, it's dipped down before it dips up. Can anyone else relate to that when you have menial tasks or like low energy brain tasks that are rudely interrupted by good ideas?
Definitely, yeah. Anytime I'm working with my hands or I'm doing a job that is going to just take hours and it's kind of the same process over and over, the whole time just coming up with ideas, coming up with stories. And I'm like, I can't wait to get through this and be finished so I can go and find some paper or something to write all of this down on. But yeah, that's exactly when it hits, yeah.
Yeah, at the gym sometimes I'll get something like that. If you're just doing something really boring, like, I don't know, swimming, like just a really repetitive activity, you'll just be like, oh, that's a thing.
It used to happen to me a lot when I was working as a bartender. And for those of you who have frequented bars, one of the things we have to do is polish wine glasses, a lot of them. And the gag on me at work was that I always look like I'm having a daydream while I'm polishing wine glasses. And like, I think I literally had the whole first chapter of my book go through my head while I was polishing wine glasses. So that makes a lot of sense.
Any boss that expects your full attention on the task when you're polishing wine glasses is not a good boss. Running, jogging, like Alex said, exercise or just states of nothing.
Or being on the bus as well, I noticed. Like if you're moving.
Man, absolutely.
If you're staring out the window of a bus or something. Yeah.
Ali, you were talking about the brain needs to go into like the shutdown state. It's almost like your mind needs to go into the back room where it keeps the stories, like leave for a moment and then come back out. It kind of reminds me of clearing the cache. It's almost like you need like that state to be lowered and just then you can load up new processes.
Yeah, 100%. I know Neil Gaiman's talked about this, and I don't think he probably hasn't read this book, but I think he's tapped into the same thought in that he's like, you need to get bored.
Yeah,
That's the advice he gives a lot of new writers. They're like, how do I go away? And he's like, go away, get bored. And I think he's accidentally describing this phenomenon of you need to go away, lower your brain activity before you can shoot it up into the zone.
I think Zen talks about the idea of no mind as well, right? Effortless action, where you clear the mind and then you shoot the arrow at the target. I think it's the same kind of thing. The idea of
You
like
shoot
not
the arrow with the target.
I meant to say
at the arrow.
That's how good you are.
you take the target.
Wow. Why not?
That's the moment when you split the arrow with the arrow.
Yeah.
So circling full circle back to what Matan was saying, does any of us 5 have any personal tricks and tips that we use ourselves to get into our zone? Is anyone having a moment of, oh, I've accidentally been doing that, I guess?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm sure we all have heaps, but I'll just rattle some off now. My thing is, if I tell myself I'm going to write, I'm going to write. Like, there will be words on the page. Like, there's no discussion. So what I do is I have a backlog of like a cache of story ideas and things, and I'll literally keep them on my phone, look at them, going that's kind of the vibe I want, and then I'll just make myself do that. And usually it's really easy. The first bit's usually pretty easily, and you'll sort of work through that. So that's a tip and trick. But honestly, I think the far greater trick, and I'm sure you guys will echo this as well, I'm just taking all the good points here, but is just the habitualness of it. Like, I know, Ali, you said you've been getting up and just writing before work. That's always, for probably a couple of years now, that's been my format. I'll just get up, and ideally the first thing I'll do is just go to write. It helps a lot if I've, like I said, have that cache or have decided in the past this is what I'm going to work on, and then it's had a chance to ferment a bit. But like, I'll just write for the sake of writing something, just to keep the muscle, primed, essentially. So that's what I'd say.
It sounded at first like you intimidate yourself into writing.
Yeah, there's a degree of that. It's almost like there's no argument. It's like you're going to write.
Strategy.
Like an aggressive personal trainer in the back of your head. It's just like screaming at you.
100%. Yeah, I practically.
No, I love it. I wish he was in my house all the time, intimidating me into writing.
I just do that over the
phone. By the way, Alex is a great motivator, jokes aside. And if anyone ever needs, even listeners, I'll give you his number at the end of the podcast. You can just call him. I'm sure he's going to be very happy. His time zone is Sydney.
Yeah, if you want to get yelled.
What you need, Alex, is like an answering machine that people can call, and they just get the message of you telling them to write, and you can charge for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that'll be my business.
Quit your day job.
Jokes aside, I listen to music usually. Sometimes I just close my eyes, listen to music. It got to the point where my mind associates certain projects with certain musics, usually video game soundtracks. But and if I want to keep thinking about it when I'm away from my computer, I would usually listen to the scene's soundtrack and try to take myself back to it. But I've had moments where it wouldn't come out, and I just said, okay, I'm just going to listen to music until I feel like writing. And sometimes that's 20 minutes, but it does work for me.
I don't know if you guys are the same. I totally use music. I know exactly what you're talking about with like certain soundtracks evoking certain pieces. Like this previous thing I wrote, I can't play Vermintide without thinking about that story now. Can you guys listen to music with words, like with lyrics? I can't.
It's harder.
Yeah.
It's harder.
Yeah.
It's almost like the part of my brain that needs to process the words in the song is the same part that's going to write, and it's being used. I absolutely can't do it. As soon as there's any spoken word at all, it completely takes me out of my writing.
To be honest, even instrumental music I find distracting most of the time. Some video game soundtracks I can do if I want to evoke a certain mood, but it's very specific and fitting. Usually it's just like dead silence or a noise machine or something.
I would often loop something, and after you've heard it like 5 or 6 times, you kind of stop. You won't pay any attention to it. It's just in the background, but whatever the tone is.
I use that too.
There for the story. I also use I try to use like little cheats with sentences, whereas like I was saying, if I try to get a sentence, try to start off with a sentence from a jumping point. I also try to have the discipline to stop writing when it's going well in like the middle of a sentence. Yeah. So that when I come back to that story, I'm just continuing the sentence and just going straight back into what I was doing.
You cliffhanger yourself.
Yeah.
Hey?
That would drive me insane. I don't know if I could do that.
It's so hard to do it because you're obviously it's going so well and you're enjoying it and you want to get to the end of what you're enjoying and you're just like, nah, I'm going to stop right there.
That's
and then
good.
When I come back,
that's really good.
That works when you come back to it. Like, I remember having tried that once and like trying to get into it and being like, oh, well, this is not the same vibe that I had yesterday. Does that work for you? Like going back into it, or?
Definitely, because particularly if I'm using music as well, because what would happen is otherwise I would write to the end of the scene and then stop, and then I'm coming back and I'm asking myself what's happening in the next scene. Yeah. Whereas if I stop as I'm writing, I'm coming back and continuing that scene, and then when that scene ends, I just go straight into the next scene. That works quite well, but it's hard. It's hard to stop. You almost need to have like an alarm that goes off, and then you say, "Oh God!"
I have an alarm, James. I have an alarm, and every day I just kind of look at it. You know, like, what do you want? And I imagine the alarm saying, "You know what I want."
Before we move on, I'm sure I don't know if I'm sure. Reading good literature for me is such a good way to get into the zone. It feels almost like preloading that author's voice into your head. So when you go to write, you've got this set of language, tone, voice, like already to go. I think some of the best writing I've ever done is when I come off the tail of reading something that's tonally or maybe in terms of its language or theme similar. Same with you guys?
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I was reading a bunch of Bret Easton Ellis a couple of days ago, and then I just like jumped straight into a realist style of story, and it was just like the tone wasn't exactly the same, but it was close enough that I just
since a bunch of you are going through classics, do you feel like it ever kind of invades your writing? Like,
well, I'm cheating.
Moby Dick.
Yeah, I'm cheating a little bit in that I will surround myself with novels and voices that I'm trying to invoke. So precisely because I'm working on Cypress, that's why I started the Hilary Mantels, the Moby Dicks.
I don't think that's cheating at all. I don't, because like nothing that's going to come out of you is going to be the same. It's always filtered through the entity that is Ali. It's always going to come out as something original. No one knows you've been reading Hilary Mantel.
Yeah.
Well, they do now.
They do now, yeah.
Though I heard a teacher tell me that you shouldn't read the genre you're writing at that point. And I think her argument was to, like, don't, go too deep into the one well, like try and pick from what, the full platter that's out there and then make it your thing. But I tried that and I genuinely don't like it. I like going 100% in on whatever my thing is at that point.
Yeah, 100%.
Particularly if you're first drafting, I think the idea is that they don't want you to be influenced by other works, and that's why people say that. But then you'll find techniques and you'll find, I guess, like elements of the story that like cause you. They just lead to so much more inspiration that I think it's actually. I wouldn't agree with that.
Can we just admit that all writers, since the dawn of history, are basically thieves? Okay, some better than others. Let's just put it out there. We're a bunch of thieves. I'm a thief. The ones that came
culture is a recombination of culture. Like no idea is original. It's all just.
It's like an iPhone. We get a new iPhone every year, but it's basically the same. The camera's a different size.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Yeah. This does actually lead nicely into the passage I did want to read as our reading for this podcast. It is straight from the book I've been talking about, The Neuroscience of Creativity. And it will talk about this idea of the brain needing to disorganize the information it's been picking up on. So I like the idea that it's stealing from the world we've been absorbing, and then it needs to disorganize before we write it, regurgitate it. I'll let the passage speak for itself. Writing a novel takes a relatively long time, at least a year or sometimes more. Most novelists have very regular habits. They typically get up and do their writing during the morning and early afternoon. They write even when they feel they have nothing to say. They have learned that otherwise they might not write at all. And much novel writing is akin to consciously generating spontaneous speech. The short-term discourse plan is there, and the sentences are created and the words are chosen on the fly, but simply at a slower pace because the motor task of writing is slower than the task of speaking. Much of this is in the domain of ordinary creativity. Most novelists have larger vocabularies than average. They have the opportunity to hone their skills through practice. When not writing, they often carry notebooks in which they jot down interesting observations to use at a later time, perhaps when they get stuck on defining a character or finding the best twist for a plot. But then there are moments, ellipses. Sometimes a new character emerges out of nowhere and becomes the nidus for an entire novel. Sometimes a wholly new idea occurs to a writer, as when Joyce decided to write in Stream of Consciousness or Tolkien conceived of hobbits in Middle-earth. Sometimes the prose just come pouring forth from brain to fingers to keyboard to page without any conscious effort at all. Those are times when extraordinary creativity is the neural mode. Generally, this extraordinary creativity mode cannot be sustained throughout the entire long period of novel writing, but it may comprise anything from small to a significant part of it. The process seems to be inspired. It sometimes occurs when in a dreamlike state or even during sleep. This appears to be a different process from the conscious production of a stream of speech or writing. It happens far more rapidly and produces something substantial that is completely new. The associations are occurring freely. They are running unchecked, not subject to any of the reality principles that normally govern them. Initially, these associations may seem meaningless or unconnected. I would hypothesize that during the creative process, the brain begins by disorganizing, making links between shadowy forms of objects or symbols or words, or remembered experiences that have not previously been linked. Out of this disorganization, self-organization eventually emerges and takes over in the brain. The result is a completely new and original thing, a mathematical function, a symphony, or a poem. We have seen from the study of rest, which is what they call the dip down, which tapped into the unconscious, that free-floating and uncensored thought, also known as primary process thought, primitive thought, or original thought, occurs when multiple regions of our highly developed human association cortex interact with one another. When this occurs, the brain is working as a self-organizing system, but in a different way. And that's the reading.
Word. I love the idea of like the shadowy forms forming connections. That's absolutely how it feels.
I just really like this confirmation that we do have to kind of dip down before we go up, because it really aligns with everything I've felt in my life, that like on days that I'm busy mentally, it's just so hard to get into it. And sometimes on days where I'm pretty much a couch potato, I feel so creative.
Needing to feel bored.
I just love this confirmation that it's not, lightning strikes and, we're being gifted these ideas by some other third entity that we may name as something else. But this idea that it is just the unconscious back of our brain, the part of the brain we can't control, is working. I'm a big believer in the idea, like rumination, that if I'm stuck on a problem, sometimes the best thing I can do is just go away and do something else. And even though I'm not actively trying to solve that plot point or trying to work out why that character's doing that thing, I'm learning to trust that my brain is solving it anyway. And even bringing it back to a non-writing anecdote, lately my dreamscape has been very unimaginative, where it is like a Marvel Cinematic cross-universe moment where like a mentor from my past is interacting with my current boss and is having a conversation with my friend. Like, it's all the things that are currently stressing myself out are like, that's my dream. They all start talking to each other and I'm there trying to like manage and send emails to them so they can communicate properly. And that's my dream. And then I wake up and I'm like, that's just my life. That's so boring. Where's the metaphor?
Where are the unicorns?
Where's the flying eagle that symbolizes my stress, rather than my boss talking to like my old boss? So in the sense that dreams exist so we can process all the stuff that we're not able to process during the day. Like I've learned to trust that my brain is processing my stories even when I'm not actively writing.
Before we move on, I have a tale relating to that about an English scientist called Michael Faraday. I think he's also the developer of the Faraday cage. It could just be the same name. Faraday was working on the molecular structure of benzene, right? He was banging his head against the wall about this. What the hell is the structure of benzene? He couldn't work it out. And I think this was in the middle 20th century or maybe earlier, where a lot of, when was it? 1825. And one night he has this dream where this really intensely vivid image of a serpent eating its own tail was like burning its way into his mind, like in a way that felt like this is symbolic, this is important, like this ring shape. And then he wakes up and he's like, oh my God, benzene's a ring. And he goes and he tests his idea. And yeah, that's exactly it. Benzene is a ring-shaped molecule. And it came to him in a really profound dream. It's just one story, but I totally think that, when you're sleeping, dreaming, all those background thoughts, there's number crunching happening in the background. There's always processing to work.
I must say my dreams are underperforming. They have solved zero problems in my life. I don't know if I can change them for better dreams. Who do I talk to? But
Michael Faraday.
Like zero success rate from my dreams. They made things worse. They never improved mine.
I think it was a one-off zinger of a dream, but I haven't had any really profound ones either. So take it with a grain of salt.
Pretty rare for sure.
We're nearing the end of our podcast. Did anyone want to jump in with any quotes for this week?
I got one. If I think I might have even used it already. If someone tell me if we have, and we'll just have to edit in another one. But I don't know. This is a very workhorsey.
Let's check our listeners' loyalty.
Yeah, exactly. This is a very workhorsey approach. But I just always love the oh God, what's his name? The Woody Allen quote that he's just like showing up as half the battle. Like he's like, or showing up as like 80% of the battle. Just getting there, like putting some stuff down. I always find that very inspiring because it's so actionable.
That's a good one.
Yeah, the moment I decided, well, I didn't decide, but a mentor told me that writer's block doesn't exist. It's just you sit down, you write, and as I think it was you, James or Paddy was saying earlier, you just got to write out the crap, and then the words will start getting good.
Yeah, subscribe to that.
All right. Well, this has been Pros and Cons from the Precipice Fiction podcast. And thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And we'll be back next week.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.